Welcome back to the second session of cultural criticism. We stopped last time on this slide talking about reflection prompt. Consider your own cultural background and education. What perspectives have been centered in your learning? What cultures or viewpoints have been marginalized or absent? How might cultural criticism look different if centered in your particular cultural context? What unique insights might your perspective contribute? What questions might you ask that others wouldn't think to ask? Skills development, critical thinking, and cultural awareness. Cultural criticism isn't just about acquiring theoretical knowledge, it's fundamentally about developing sophisticated cognitive and interpersonal skills. The practice of cultural criticism cultivates critical thinking, cultural awareness, and the reflexivity that extend far beyond academic contexts into personal and professional life. These are transferable skills, abilities you will use regardless of your career path. Whether you become an educator, journalist, business professional, artist, healthcare worker, or anything else, the capacities cultural criticism develops will serve you well. Recognizing personal biases. We all interpret culture through our particular social positions and accumulated experiences. Critical self awareness means recognizing how your race, gender, class, nationality, and other social locations shape what you notice, what seems natural or strange, and what interpretations seem obvious or implausible. This recognition doesn't eliminate bias that's impossible, but it enables a more nuanced, humble analysis. When you recognize when you recognize your biases, you can ask what might I be missing from my particular position? Whose perspective should I consult? How might someone differently suited interpret this text? This humility strengthens rather than weakness or weakens analysis. Now let's go to developing intellectual competence. Analyzing cultural texts from diverse contexts develops intercultural competence, the ability to understand, appreciate, and navigate cultural differences. This skill becomes increasingly crucial in our globalized world, where personal and professional success often requires working across cultural boundaries. Cultural criticism provides structured practice in understanding unfamiliar perspectives. When you analyze text from cultures different from yours, you practice perspective talking. You learn to ask, how might this make sense within that cultural context? What values or assumptions I'm bringing that I do not apply here? What would I need to learn to understand this more deeply? Now let's move to applying assessment frameworks. The value assessment of learning in undergraduate education rubrics provide structured ways to assess cultural understanding. These rubrics evaluate knowledge of cultural worldview, framework, ability to interpret intercultural experience, and the capacity for intercultural empathy and openness. Regular self assessment using these frameworks track your developing competence. Do not just wait for teachers to assess you. Regularly assess yourself. Am I developing these capacities? Where am I strong? Where do I need growth? Engaging in reflective practice. Meaningful learning requires reflection, thinking deeply about how new knowledge connects to existing understanding and lived experience. Regular reflective writing helps you process course content, identify assumptions being challenged, recognize perspective shifts, and articulate what cultural criticism reveals about your own context and experiences. You might keep a reflection journal, writing after each class or reading. Ask yourself what surprised me, what challenged my thinking, what questions do I have, how does this connect to my experience, what am I seeing differently now? Skills development. These skills develop through consistent practice. Each cultural text you analyze, each theoretical framework you apply, each discussion you participate in cultivates your critical capacities. The goal isn't to achieve perfect objectivity. That's neither possible nor desirable. And instead, cultural criticism aims for a situated, reflexive knowledge that acknowledges its own partiality while striving for deeper understanding. Situated knowledge means I know from this particular position with these particular tools within these particular limitations. I cannot know everything, can't see from all positions, but I can be rigorous, honest, and accountable from where I stand. Iterative practice exercise. First, analyze cultural text using multiple theoretical lenses. Identify which interpretations seem most compelling and why. Reflect on how your social position influences your interpretation. Discuss with peers from different backgrounds to challenge assumptions. Revise your understanding based on new perspective encountered. This iterative process of analysis, reflection, and revision develops both intellectual humility and analytical sophistication. You learn to hold interpretations provisionally, recognizing that multiple valid reading often exist. You become comfortable with complexity and ambiguity rather than seeking simple answers. These are precisely the critical thinking skills our complex interconnected world demands. In a world of information overload, competing narratives, and complex problems, these capacities are essential. Now let's move to key terms and concepts. Introduction. Mastering cultural criticism requires fluency with specialized vocabulary. These terms aren't really academic jargon, they're precise conceptual tools that enable sophisticated analysis. Understanding these concepts opens up new ways of seeing and discussing culture. They give you language for phenomena you might have sensed but couldn't articulate. They enable precision and nuance in cultural analysis. Culture and ideology. The entire way of life of people or of a people, including practices, beliefs, values, artifacts, symbols, and systems of meaning. Cultures isn't just high art or elite practice, but encompasses all aspects of social life, from language to food to media to social organization. Ideology, systems of ideology, beliefs, and the values that shape how we understand the world and justify existing social arrangements. Ideology often operates invisibly, making particular ways of recognizing society seem neutral are natural, inevitable, and common sense rather than historically constructed and serving specific interests. For example, capitalist ideology makes private property market competition and individual success through work seem natural, just how things are, but there are historically specific arrangements that could be otherwise. Ideology naturalizes them, making alternatives that seem impossible or unthinkable. Hegemony and discourse. Domination through consent rather than force. Hegemonic power operates when subordinated groups accept and internalize the worldview of dominant groups, seeing existing hierarchies as natural or deserved. Antonio Gramsci developed this concept to explain how power maintains itself without constant cohesion or cohesion. Discourse systems of language, knowledge, and practice that shape what can be said, thought, and known. Foucault showed how discourse isn't neutral, but exercises power by determining legitimate versus illegitimate statements, authoritative versus unauthorized speakers, and thinkable versus unthinkable ideas. Discourse doesn't just describe reality, it constructs it. Medical discourse doesn't just describe disease, it creates categories of disease, normal versus pathological, sick versus healthy. Legal discourse doesn't just describe crime, it defines what accounts or what counts as criminal. Now let's move to representation and batrachi. Representation, how people, places, events, and identities are depicted in cultural texts. Representation isn't a mere reflection but actively construct meaning. Who gets represented, how they're portrayed by whom, and for what audiences all matter profoundly. Struggles over representations are struggles over power. Patriarchy, social systems structured by male dominance and the subordination of women and feminine coded values. Patriarchy operates through institutions, praxis, and ideologies that position men as naturally superior and entitled to power while restricting women's autonomy and opportunities. Now let's move to colonialism and systematic racism. Colonialism, political, economic, and cultural domination of one group by another, typically involving territorial control. European colonialism profoundly shaped the modern world, creating lasting structures of global inequality and cultural imperialism that persist even after formal decolonization. Then let's move to systematic racism. Racial inequality reduced through situations, policies, and the practices rather than just individual prejudices. Systematic racism means racial hierarchy is embedded in how societal function in legal systems, economic structures, educational institutions, and cultural representations. It operates whether or not individuals are personally prejudiced. Now let's move to intersectionality, recognition that systems of operation interconnect and that people occupy multiple social positions simultaneously. Kimberly uh, Crenshaw coined this term to describe how Black women experience distinct forms of discrimination that cannot be understood by analyzing race, and gender separately. These concepts provide a shared vocabulary for cultural criticism, enable precise communication about complex phenomena. As you engage with course materials, practice using these terms accurately in your analysis. Over time, this vocabulary will become second nature, allowing you to articulate sophisticated observations about culture and power. Now let's move to theories and critics to know. Introduction. Culture criticism has been shaped by brilliant thinkers who transformed how we understand culture and society. Familiarize yourself with these key figures and their contributions provides essential context for contemporary critical practice. These aren't mere historical footnotes, their ideas remain vital tools for analysis. When you understand where concepts came from, who developed them, what problems they were addressing, you use them more effectively. Now let's go to Raymond Williams, 1921 to 1988, British Marxist cultural theorist who transformed cultural studies by insisting cultural is ordinary, not just the elite art, but the whole way of life of a society. His concepts of dominant, residual, and emergent cultures help analyze cultural change, keywords, culture and society, the long revolution keywords is particularly valuable. It traces how key culture and social terms have changed in meaning historically, showing that concepts we take for granted are historically constructed. Williams made cultural studies possible by insisting ordinary cultural matters and deserve serious analysis. Now let's go to Edward Said, 1935 to 2003, uh, Palestinian American scholar whose Orientalism 1978 founded post-colonial criticism by demonstrating how Western scholarship constructed the Orient to justify imperialism. Said showed how representation serves power, making cultural criticism inseparable from political analysis, also crucial culture and imperialism. Extending his analysis to show how canonical Western literature novels by Austen, Dickens, Conrad was implicated in imperial ideology even when not explicitly about empire. Said's work transformed post-colonial studies and showed Western scholars that their supposedly objective knowledge often served Western power interests. Now let's go to Michael Foucault, 1926 to 1984, French philosopher who revolutionized understanding of power and knowledge. Foucault argued power operates through discourse shaping that what counts as truth and knowledge. His genealogical method traces how categories like madness, sexuality, and criminality were historically constructed. Essential texts discipline and punish the history of sexuality. Foucault's this doesn't mean they're not real, but they're not eternal or natural. They are products of specific history, historical processes and the power relations. Now let's go to Bill Hawks, 1952 to 2021, pioneering Black feminist theorist who spelled her name in lowercase to shift focus from individual identity to ideas. Hawks developed the intersectional analysis examining how race, gender, and class interconnected. Her concept of the oppositional gaze describes how Black women critically view media that marginalize them. Keywords anti woman, feminist theory from margin to center, Black locks. Her work reminds us that cultural criticism could be accessible, connected to lived struggles or struggles, useful for people working toward justice. Theory isn't just academic exercise, it's tool for liberation. Now let's move to Stuart Hall, 1932 to 2014. Jamaican British cultural theorist who founded British Cultural Studies. Hall's encoding and decoding model showed audiences actively interpret rather than passively receive media messages, opening space for oppositional readings. His work on cultural identity examined how identity is constructed through representation. Essential Cultural Studies 1983, encoding decoding essays on race and identity and the cultural politics collected in various volumes. Hall showed that popular culture isn't just ideological domination, it's a tyrann of a struggle where meanings are contested and resistance is possible. Now let's go to the timeline of critical development. 1950s to 1960s. Raymond Williams and others established cultural studies, expanding literary criticism to examine mass culture and everyday life. 1970s to 1980s. Foucault said, and feminist critics transform analysis by centering questions of power, representation, and identity. 1990s to 2000s. Postcolonial and critical race theorists expand and challenge Western dominated frameworks. 2010 to the present time, digital culture, intersectionality, and transitional perspectives shape contemporary criticism. This timeline shows cultural criticism as dynamic conversation. Each generation builds on previous insights while challenging limitations, responding to new cultural phenomena, incorporating new voices and perspectives. Now let's move to synthesis, ongoing conversation. These thinkers do not represent isolated insights but ongoing conversations. Williams responds to Marxist orthodoxy. Said builds on Foucault's while critiquing Eurocentrism. Hawks challenges white feminism exclusions. Hall senses multiple traditions. Understanding these connections reveals cultural criticism as collaborative intellectual work with each generation building on and questioning previous insights. You're entering this ongoing conversation, bringing your own perspectives and concerns. Cultural criticism isn't finished, it's continuously evolving, and your generation will shape its future. Now let's go for further study recommendation. For deeper engagement, read primarily text by these theorists rather than just summaries. Their original arguments are more nuanced and compelling than second-hand accounts. Start with accessible work like Hawks, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center of Said's Introduction to Orientalism. Let their ideas challenge and transform your thinking. Do not just learn what they said, engage with their arguments, agree or disagree, but do so based on understanding their actual claims, not um, caricatures or summaries. Now let's go to analytical framework. Cultural criticism becomes powerful when theory meets practice. This step-by-step framework guides you through in conducting rigorous cultural analysis, while each text requires adapted approaches. These core questions and the procedures provide a solid foundation for critical work. Think of this as a toolkit you want to use every tool for every project, but having diverse tools available means you can select appropriate ones for specific tasks. Now let's go to the analytical framework steps from 1 to 4. First, select and describe the text. Choose a specific cultural text, film, advertisement, novel, social media post, etc. Provide basic description. What is it? When and where was it produced? Who created it and for what audience? Identify relevant contexts. Research historical, social, political, and economic contexts. What was happening when this text was produced? What cultural conversations was it entering? What institutions and industries shaped its creation and distribution? Through theoretical lenses. Select appropriate theoretical frameworks based on your text and research questions. Different theories eliminate different aspects. Consider using multiple lenses for richer analysis. Ask critical questions. Apply questions from your choosing frameworks. Who holds power? Whose voices are centered to marginalized? What assumptions are naturalized? What ideologies are reproduced or challenged? How does representation function? Who shown how, by whom, for what audiences? Now let's go to analytical framework steps from 5 to 8. Analyze specific elements, examine concrete textual features, language, imagery, narrative, structure, characterization, etc. Support claims with specific evidence. Show how formal choices create meaning and serve ideological functions. Consider alternative readings. How might different audiences interpret this text? What oppositional readings are possible? What meanings might creators not have intended but which emerge from particular perspectives? Reflect on your position. How does your social location shape your interpretation? What might you be missing from your particular perspective? What assumptions are you bringing? Synthesize analysis. Draw conclusions about the text's cultural work. What does your analysis reveal about power, ideology, or cultural values? What broader implications does this case study suggest? Move from specific text to broader patterns. One advertisement might exemplify larger trends in gender representation. One film might reveal dominant ideologies about race or nation. Synthesize shows why your analysis matters beyond understanding this particular text. Now let's move to essential questions for cultural criticism. Power and authority. Who holds power in this text? How is authority established and maintained? What power relations does this text neutralize? Whose interests are served? Representation and voice. Who gets to speak and who is silenced? How are different groups represented? What stereotypes appear? Whose perspective is centered as universal? Ideology and assumptions. What worldview is presented as natural? What assumptions go unquestioned? What alternatives are made unthinkable? How might this text be ideological? Keep these questions handy when analyzing any cultural text. They help you move beyond surface description to critical analysis. Now let's move to sample analysis, Coca-Cola advertisement introduction. for an example. So, text 2015 Coca-Cola Share a Coke campaign featuring bottles with popular names printed on labels. Description, marketing campaigning, marketing campaign replacing Coca-Cola logo with common first save, encouraging consumers to find bottles with their names or friends, names and share photos on social media. Context emerged during a peak of social media culture and personalization trends. Coca-Cola facing declining soda consumption and the needed to re-engage consumers emotionally. Theoretical approach, Marxist analysis of commodity fetishism combined with examination of how capitalism colonizes personal relationships. Now let's go to the analysis. The campaign transforms a mass-produced commodity into something seemingly personal and unique. By adding names, Coca-Cola creates artificial scarcity, not every name available, and emotional attachments to a standard product. The campaign brilliantly exploits social relationships for marketing. Sharing becomes tied to purchasing and displaying branded products. Consumers perform free advertising by posing or posting photos while believing they're expressing a personal connection. The campaign naturalizes consumption as the medium for human relationship, making corporate products seem essential to friendship and social belonging. This exemplifies how late capitalism doesn't just sell products, but colonize social life itself, transforming relationships into marketing opportunities while appearing to celebrate connections. Alternative reading. Some consumers have found the campaign exclusionary when their names weren't available, sparking discussions about whose names count as common and raising questions about cultural representation in marketing. This framework provides a structure while allowing flexibility. Adapt these steps and questions to your specific text and theoretical interests. The goal is systematic, rigorous analysis that reveals cultural meaning and ideological operations. Now let's go to visual and interactive elements. Cultural criticism comes alive through visual examples and interactive engagement. These materials demonstrate how abstract theoretical concepts eliminate concrete cultural texts, making criticism tangible and applicable rather than merely theoretical. Now let's move to power dynamics in cultural representation. And we can say that the infographic above visualizes how power operates through cultural representation. Notice how dominant groups occupy center positions, speak in active voice, and are respected with complexity and nuance. Marginalized groups appear in peripheral positions, often spoken about rather than speaking themselves and reduced to stereotypes. This spatial and the narrative positioning reproduces social hierarchies, making inequality seem natural rather than constructed. When you see this pattern repeated across thousands and thousands of texts, it teaches audiences whose stories matter, whose perspectives are universal versus particular, whose humanity is complex versus simple. Notice how this works. It's not that any single text causes harm, it's the cumulative effect of patterns across media that neutralizes hierarchy. Now let's go to before and after cultural criticism. We are talking about global perspectives. So before cultural criticism, viewing this 1950s advertisement, we might simply see it as a product of its time, perhaps a nostalgic or quaint. The ad appears a straightforward woman happily using a household appliance. After cultural criticism, applying feminist analysis, we recognize how the ad constructs femininity as essentially domestic, derives women's worth for male approval, and neutralizes women's unpaid household labor as a joy fulfillment rather than economic exploitation. The happy housewife masks patriarchal power relations. Unpaid labor extracted from women benefits men and capitalism. This transformation shows cultural criticism's power. What seemed innocent or quaint reveals ideological work maintaining gender inequality. Now let's move to video examples of positional readings in practice. The following video clip demonstrates how different viewers can produce radically different interpretations of the same text based on their social positions and critical frameworks. Now, clip number one, Disney, The Little Mermaid. Dominant reading, romantic story about following your dreams and finding true love. Feminist oppositional reading, narrative requiring female protagonists to literally give up her voice and transform her body to win male approval, reinforcing patriarchal beauty standards and female subordination. Silent self-sacrificing, defined by relationship to a man, Ariel's father and the potential husband make decisions about her life. Her goal is marriage, not autonomy or adventure for its own sake. Now let's move to clip number two, luxury car commercial. Dominant reading, celebration of success, achievement, and quality engineering. Marxist oppositional reading, naturalization of class inequality, display of conspicuous consumption as aspirational, and suggestion that human worth derives from commodity ownership rather than intrinsic qualities. Club number three, charity advertisement. Dominant reading, humanitarian appeal to help those less fortunate. Postcolonial oppositional reading, white savior. Narrative positioning, Western viewers as rescuers and African Asian subjects as passive victims of reducing colonial power relations while obscuring systematic causes of inequality. This oppositional reading doesn't mean charity is bad, but it reveals how even humanitarian appeals can produce colonial ideologies. Now let's move to discussion, promise, and reflection questions. Analyze your favorite TV show or film using two different theoretical lenses. How do different frameworks reveal different meanings? Which approach feels the most illuminating and why? Identify cultural text that you initially interpreted one way, but how, but now understand differently after studying cultural criticism. What changed in your perception? What assumptions were challenged? Find examples of representation in media from media that you find particularly problematic or particularly progressive. What makes these representations significant? What culture work are they performing? How might your own social media posts or cultural productions look through a critical lens? What ideologies might you be unconsciously reproducing? What alternative approaches could be or could you take? This applies critical consciousness to your own practice, not just consuming media, but examining your own cultural production. Now let's go to the next slide, talking about visual and interactive materials. These visual and interactive materials transform abstract theory into concrete practice. By examining specific examples and engaging in guided discussion, you develop the practical skills to conduct sophisticated cultural analysis. This goal is making criticism an active, engaged practice rather than passive reception of ideas. You're not just learning what Said or Hawks or Foucault said, you're learning to do cultural criticism yourself, to analyze texts you encounter, to participate in ongoing critical conversations. Now, let's move to assessment applying culture and criticism. Mastery of cultural criticism requires not just understanding theories, but skillfully applying them to analyze cultural texts. Evaluate your critical competencies through multiple complementary approaches. Major assignment. Introduction. Assignment overview. Write a 100 or 1,500 to 2,000 words critical essay analyzing a cultural text of your choice using at least two theoretical approaches covered in the course. Your essay should demonstrate theoretical understanding, analytical skills, attention to context, and reflexive awareness of your interpretive position. Text selection. Choose a substantive cultural text, a film, a novel, television, series, advertising campaign, social media phenomenon, video game, music album, or other cultural product. Select something complex enough to support sustained analysis and multiple theoretical approaches. A single tweet probably isn't complex enough. A film or novel or ad campaign is. Choose something that genuinely interests you. You'll do better work on texts you care about. Thank you so much for watching me teaching you the second session of cultural criticism. Until next time tomorrow, ta-ta for now.